Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM, your GM, and we are here. This is a show where we just talk about gaming, games, game design, game theory, and just discussion about role playing games, board games, and just in general. So, welcome to everyone. Welcome to John and Padre who are in the chat. I try to remember that you fall back, but even I got hung up on the time zone change. I thought I went to visit Mr. Bob Crumb this last weekend, and I thought that I was going to lose an hour, but actually I gained an hour. So I still don't even understand how this works. But Bob and I had a lot of great chats over the weekend, and one of the things we talked about is what we're going to talk about today. What do you do if your group has only love for one game? And you, being the connoisseur of RPGs that you are, wish to get them to try something new. Now, most often I've heard this come from the Dungeons and Dragons space, and I won't even say fifth edition, fourth edition, third edition. This idea that D&D has become synonymous with role-playing games, so why would I want to try anything else if I can just stay in my comfort zone? And there's the sunk cost fallacy, which says, hey, I want to stay where I've spent my money, and I get that. I was at Bob's house and he gave me the Wi-Fi password and my phone automatically updated it to my iPad, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. But there are some things that our games don't do well. It's why there are dozens of different RPGs out there. I am jealous of you guys who are in the standard time and do not need to deal with such modern wizardry as the changing of clocks. So what do you do if you have a group that only wants to play D&D or Call of Cthulhu or Savage Worlds or Palladium? That was my group growing up. They only wanted to play Palladium Fantasy and Rifts, and it was met with any other game system as, why would I waste my time? Especially with Rifts. You can do anything you want in Rifts, so why would I waste my time with Dungeons and Dragons or Shadowrun or Earth Dawn? It's a tough question, especially if you're the game master and you just want to show them that there are not better ways, but different ways. Bob and I were talking about Pathfinder 2 and how it does a lot of things that D&D does, but in a way that as a GM he enjoys better, and from what he knows of his table that they may enjoy. And you get into a groove, you get into a comfort zone, you get into this feeling that I know the rules, and any change or variation thereof I won't enjoy. We all get into this. It doesn't matter whether it's role-playing games or video games or food or travel spots. We all fall into this habit of what is comfortable and familiar is obviously what is best. Padre, I appreciate that. That's fantastic. Hopefully you're getting to get to play some Torg now. I think you are. I think we've talked about that. I apologize. I'm still recovering from the time change. Temporal magic always fuddles with my brain for about a week. So there's a couple of ways to do this. There is the shock and awe, where the group shows up and you just say, hey, tonight we're running a one-shot. I am less of a fan of the shock and awe than I used to be. Like, give your players a little bit of a heads up. But I think there are some fun ways to introduce a game change, a system change, if you want to get your players interested. I think the one shot is a great idea. Or as Bob and I talked about, maybe the two shot, because the one shot, your first experience with the one shot is just, what are these dice? What is this character sheet? Your second session is usually, a little better. Awesome, Padre. Glad to hear it. So I tend to like to say, hey, I really want to run a horror game, and Call of Cthulhu or Savage Worlds, especially if you have not gone and backed that Kickstarter, it's still up, going on right now. Go check over on Kickstarter. There is the Horror Companion and the Pine Pinewood. I'm sure John will put it in the chat on what we're going to be looking for, and I'll ask JD to link it into the show notes. But just say, hey, I want to run a horror one shot or two shot, and I want mechanics that reflect that, right? You want to be able to explain to them that it's not that you dislike the game that they're playing now, but there are games that take a genre or a style of play and are specifically built around that, right? There's nothing to say, I mean, the basic fantasy or BRP, basic role-playing system, it's not better or worse than the D20. It just does things different. And you get, both of them give you great fantasy experiences, but there is a wild difference between how D&D handles fantasy and how something like Glorantha handles fantasy. Oh, Rook, thank you, sir, for your generosity, as always. So you've got that. You've got this idea that you can pitch it as a, hey, I just want to take a short break from a game and run something a little different because, hey, it's Halloween. Let's play a horror game for a couple of sessions. The other thing is you can pitch it as, hey, I need a change as the GM. So unless one of you guys wants to GM, let's take a break, give me 1 or 2 weeks to try something new, and we can come back to what we're doing. That is sometimes a very beneficial thing for one of two reasons. One, it gets you onto the player side of the screen if your players feel really strongly about it. And two, if your players don't want to run something, you kind of get your additional game in there. The other thing you can always do is say, hey, we're going to play D&D this week or Call of Cthulhu this week, but hey, if you guys can make it, I want to run something else later in this week. And just invite them. If you can get 1 or 2 people excited about something new, that is usually enough to get a shift in the game. Now, say you have super stubborn players, like Bob and I have discussed, and they refuse to do that. And again, I get the sunk cost fallacy. I get the familiar, the comfortable. That's really what we're talking about here. And, oh, thanks, John. Yeah, 56 hours to go on the horror companion and setting for Savage Worlds. Go out and check it out. We'll link it in the show notes. We've been shouting about it on Twitter and Instagram. So I'm going to steal this one from Bob himself. Bob himself showed me this technique many, many years ago. And I've used it to great effect in my RuneQuest games. If your game has time travel, or dream sequences, or something where magic says something very weird or something very strange is now going on, switch systems. Remake their characters for them in the new system, and then run them through this other system as a way to add the disconnect that their characters would have from what is going on. So in RuneQuest, I will use the 13th Age Glorantha rules for hero questing. Or sometimes when they go into the Lunar Empire, and then use the Quest Worlds system for hero quest. So that you get this back and forth of, hey, when I'm in a different reality or even a different paradigm, there is a rules shift on me. Rook, that would be great. You could do something like, especially if you're running Pathfinder and you're running Rise of the Runelords, there's an easy way to convert back and forth, whether you're time traveling or passing into a different, like the Feywild or even the Underdark. Hey, things don't work down here the same way you think they are. If you're running a Burning Wheel game and you need to get a campaign on track because the other GM that is co-running with you is a complete flake and Bob steps in, perhaps you take the Burning Wheel crew to the World of Darkness for several months to get the storyline fixed, to get this feel of disconnect, and then bring them back in. These are ways that you can introduce little changes that are in line with the story. The players don't have to learn a whole new story. They don't have to learn whole new characters, and yet you can expose them to different mechanics. How cool would it be where if you're running the Curse of Strahd and you go into some flashback scenes where you learn about Strahd, you hand them character sheets about Call of Cthulhu. If you are running a Deadlands game and they go into the hunting grounds, switch them over to D&D, or even if they go into the future to Lost Colony. Although you have all of those rules, I'm just, playing around with this. See, that's great, John. Somebody running Curse of Strahd with Deadlands. And that's the other thing. You don't need to feel like I have to completely strip everything that my players know away when I teach them something new. Especially if you're around the table talking with your players and saying, hey, I get that you love our story. I get that you love D&D. I'm going to play with your expectations a little bit. We're going to come back to D&D, but the story is going to move on. Heck, even taking them into Torg would be a wild ride, because you can replicate most genres within Torg and then explain all of these new mechanics to them. Yeah, Rook, I agree, Padre, that a Pathfinder swayed to D&D would be awesome. I'm kind of... Or even if you're doing like a world-hopping, plane-hopping game, each plane has its own rules. Now, that's a lot of work for the GM, but you get some buy-in from the players and they'll update their character sheets. So this is a short little video. I wanted to talk about this because I think it is a struggle that some GMs have. Because of the sunk cost of buying the books and all of the minis and the digital aspects that you have, because of how familiar and ubiquitous D&D is in our role-playing games, statistically, most people's first game in the US is going to be Dungeons & Dragons, and if it's been in the last decade, it's going to be Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. The most YouTube commentary is going on it, the most Twitch streamers are streaming it. All of the references in pop culture refer not to role-playing games, but to Dungeons & Dragons. This is usually your starting point, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love D&D. I run a ton of D&D. But I'm also the GM that most people know is going to run the weird new things when they come out. That's kind of the whole point of the Iconic Production channel, that we can show off these cool other games and other settings and systems. I mean, heck, it's why we do Savage Worlds stuff. It's why we're going to come back to Savage Rifts. We're doing Torg. We're going to do some Space 1889 later. These are games that I think are just as good as Dungeons & Dragons. They approach things in a different and unique way. I think more people should be playing them. So hopefully, now if you get some pushback and your player is like, I refuse to play anything besides Dungeons & Dragons. Or, and again, I go back to D&D because it is sort of the lingua franca, which we've talked about on this channel, how ironic it is that we use the term lingua franca, but French is no longer the lingua franca. That's fine. If you say, hey, this is what we're going to play for 2 weeks, and I've got buy-in from several people, it's only a 2-shot. I'd love for you to be there, but if you just don't want to play it, I will understand that. And sometimes you've got to... If you really want to try something new, and there are players at your table who really don't, that's okay. A good friend of mine, Corey, used to say role-playing games are like Victorian dance cards. You try and get your everything filled out, but sometimes people don't want to dance with you and you don't want to dance with them, and that's okay. So, yeah, I think we've kind of run the course of this. There always the ironic truth of D&D is, or of role-playing. See, I did it too. D&D and role-playing games are becoming synonymous. The ironic truth about role-playing games is that while there are a ton of players, there always seems to be a shortage of GMs. And that while this is a lever, it is by no means a hammer. If you're the guy or gal who runs the games for your table and you want to try Savage Worlds and your players only want to play Call of Cthulhu, then maybe somebody else needs to step up. Or you take the players who want to try something new and you run it with them for a little bit and you kind of come back. I feel like this is why there are more games out there. And I do think that there's going to be some struggle. It's only going to get harder the more of a lifestyle brand D&D becomes, to get people to pull away from that and try something new. So we can set up some good advice and we can set up some good practices now. It's going to be easier for us in the future. So hopefully that has been helpful. Let me check the chat real quick. One of these days you're going to try a weekend where you do 6 games and 6 systems. Padre, you're going to have to let me know how that goes, because that is great. Oh, John, thank you for that. Proprietary eponym. That is the... Well, that's a word I'm going to stick deep in my mind and use that. Yeah, Kleenex, Xerox. These are where the name, the company name, or the product name becomes the name for everything. And it's always weird to me when that happens. Let's see here. I'm going to just scroll up real quick. See if there's anything else to look at. All right. Well, I think we are good. That is all we have for today on Behind the Screen. On Thursday, we'll be back with the mechanics of near future science fiction. And tonight, we are going to have our penultimate episode of the Diamond Armament. And in case you guys are interested, we're going to take a small break from Torg, and I'm going to be running Space 1889 here in the later half of November. As the Kickstarter is going live here next week, we will have a lot of stuff to talk about on for Strange Owl. If you're at all interested in Victorian science fiction, and we have it, we're going to talk a lot about the launch next week. I'm going to be doing question and answer streams with Tim and possibly with Daryl as we go forward. And hopefully you guys will find that interesting, and we'll be playing a little Space 1889. We've got the rest of the year sort of planned out. We're going to finish up the Diamond Armament. We're going to do some Space 1889. We're going to look at, we're going to have a pre-Christmas episode where we're going to sit around and share our favorite role-playing stories and read off the chats. I'm going to see if I can't get like a Yule log burning in the background. And then our last stream of the year will be, as it has been for the last several years, our Bureau G Christmas one-shot, which I cannot begin to describe how excited I am about that. I think this year I'm going to mix a little Christmas story with a little kaiju, and we're going to see what we get with a Christmas kaiju. I'm planning that in the background even as we speak. Yes, Regency Cthulhu did just release. We did the review of it. It's available for purchase. I think it's $45 at Chaosium. I'm holding off on my copy until there's a couple more RuneQuest books to sort of bundle together and ship out. I'm really excited. RuneQuest is going to be releasing sometime in the near future, in the way that Spaceballs refers to. When will then be now? Soon. They're going to be doing the Gods of Glorantha, 2-volume book, as well as the Prosopedia, which is going to be kind of like an in-world player artifact, so you can just look through and see what you need to know about your gods. So I will be back tonight with Torg and the FET 5. We do, thanks to Mr. Furious, have a new FET 5 emoji in the Twitch channel, which you are going to be able to use. And until then, I will see you all on Thursday. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I am JM. This is Behind the Screen. This has been an Iconic production. Have a good one.